First, in this session is Simon King from the Wilderness Leadership School in South Africa, and he will talk a little bit about the topic pro-environmental behaviour. So Simon, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. Let me get this going. How are we looking? Wait a minute. All right. How's that?
Looks very good. Yes, yes, perfect.
Okay. All right, well, good morning, everybody. My name is Simon King, Dr. King, but I do prefer Simon. I'm an unusual combination of a medical doctor and a field guide. I was a field guide working with the Wilderness Leadership School when I was studying medicine. So I've got this interesting hybrid perspective of both human well-being and environmental well-being. And we're going to talk a bit about that, about human behavior and how we can influence that for the good of wild spaces. So by way of brief introduction, what we do in the Wilderness Leadership School is this. So we'll take people and walk them out into a wild space for an experience. We look for direct experiences, so really immersive experiences. We look at communicating knowledge and information and perspectives and insights. We look at cultural elements, human and the spiritual, environmental, cultural elements. And ultimately, what we're aiming for, of course, is that magic word transformation. We're looking at how do we find those moments where we can impact people. We've been doing it since 1957, so nearly 70 years. And on the in the image there on the left, you can see Ian Player, the founder, and Makubu Ntobela, his mentor. Those two gentlemen were the first to take people on trails. It was high school age kids in South Africa. And the concept really emerged from their work. They saw in those times that we need to do this because of this reality that in the Anthropocene, we have to look at humans and human behavior because humans are the ones causing the impact on the planet. And so human behavior is the place, it's our ground zero, the place we have to work. And we've heard this, we see this a lot around an environmental community at large. It's not just wilderness. Gus Spethia, the environmental lawyer, has been quoted a lot recently. I've seen this quote come up again. This idea that the top environmental problems are to do with this sort of idea of humans, awful nature, this idea of selfishness, greed, apathy, and we've got this terrible nature, and we need a cultural and spiritual transformation. Now, this perspective is linked to another, which is that we got to move from anti-environmental to pro-environmental behavior, okay, but we scientists don't know how to do that. Now, we're here today to say that, that's not entirely accurate, that we do know a lot about how to do it. It's in the human behavioral sciences, and there's a lot that we know today that we didn't know 70 years ago, even 20 years ago. Neuroscience is a phenomenal force for knowledge creation on Earth today, and it's that we need to, let's say, tap into. We know that we try information campaigns, and they tend to underperform, maybe fails putting it a hard way, but it fails to deliver at the level we'd like. We know we've tried emotional campaigns, and the classic polar bear and ice flows is just the poster child for tweaking the emotions, and it kind of fails to deliver long-term change. These things have benefit, they have value, and they are adjuvants in a bigger campaign, but by themselves, they're not the magical, mystical silver bullet. We try these cultural, spiritual campaigns to try to redefine values and ethics, and they kind of work, but they don't work at the level we'd like them to. So it's understandable that Gus would look at it and go like, we just don't know how to do this. So it leads to this awful question of, is it even possible? And we get these memes, the leopards can't change their spots and man can't change his sin nature. It's not right. We don't believe, like House, that people don't change. In fact, the human sciences and the psychological sciences, in fact, now hard-edged neuroscience tells us that the brain is highly plastic and people are built for the express purpose of growing and changing, and that they're psychologically wired to want to do that. So the idea that we don't change is not just wrong, it's defeatist. It's never going to get us anywhere. What will get us anywhere is asking, well, all right, how? What's going to motivate behavior? Which raises one of the biggest theories in positive psychology in the last 40 years. This is self-determination theory, and it's a very well-respected, very robust theory, well-cited. Edward Dickey and Richard Ryan, they put together the book on this in the 80s. So it's not new, it's been well validated. The general concept is that motivation for your behavior comes from outside of yourself or inside of yourself. So outside is controlled as law, it's regulations, and we work on that. Protected areas, for example, are law regulation. But we know that we want to move the dial. We want to go up the spectrum. If you look at that line, we want to go from the I must do it, or external forces of I'd feel guilty if I didn't, which is perhaps polar bears. We want to cross this threshold in the middle, and we want to get to a point where we're doing something because I want to do it. And then we get to a point where we want to do it because I just can't help myself. The motivation becomes autonomous, if you look on the right there. And when we do that, it gets us on autopilot and things just happen. And that's what we want. If we want to move the way conservation works in this world, if we want to change this anti-environmental to pro-environmental behavior, if we want to secure the future of wild places, we need to put it on autopilot. So the big question you should be asking is, Simon, what's at that threshold? Because that is the key, the place we have to work. And it turns out that it's identity. Now, what's fascinating is that a long time ago, we're talking about the 70s when this theory was being fleshed out. The concept of identified motivation was known back then. It moves from identified to integrated motivation, which now sounds like Jungian theory, and integrating the shadow, the light and the dark. The idea of integrating something into ourselves so that it is us. This is the holy grail of pro-environmental behavior, and we're going to explain how to do it. But just before we get there, I've got to give you just 3 or 4 minutes of background theory of the self. And the quickest way to do it, I think, is that. Now, that image is the discovery of the self. And we all have seen this at some time to some level. We know that babies are not born with a concept of self. Babies are organisms like any other that exist in this milieu of these experiences and perceptual realities. And at some point, you realize that a part of what you're seeing, feeling, hearing, and sensing is actually you. And there's this moment in the mirror where you look and you realize, but that's me. And then in the terrible twos, you go around realizing that I am me and you are you physically, but you haven't quite got the idea that I'm emotionally separate. So when I'm hungry, I just lose my toys and I'm hungry, and the whole world has to be hungry because we're all in it together. We're all feeling the same thing. And only sort of around 5 or 6 do we start to get this idea that, well, wait a minute, we're different agents with different perspectives, emotions, needs, wants, personalities, drives. And this idea of us as different emerges and forms the self. The self is composed of this ideal self-image of who I ideally want to be and be seen as, my esteem, how good at I am being myself, and what I am. And the key thing for this purpose, the purposes of this discussion, are that the behaviors that we engage in as people are consistent always with our concept of self. When they're not, it's uncomfortable. Now, there are some conditions, and this is what we've got to focus on, where experiences or behaviors inconsistent with our identity can reorganize the entire structure of ourself. So we actually become different people. That's transformation. That's what Gus talks about. That's what the Wilderness Leadership School is talking about. How do we become different? When we accept these new experiences, we actually update our value systems. So they're replaced by new value systems. That's the holy grail of working with humanity, changing our values. That's a spiritual transformation. So what should be emerging is this idea of Jeff Goldblum and Will Smith and Independence Day. If you know the movie, there's this mothership that parks in the orbit and controls robots all around the world. And to defeat this enemy, what Jeff Goldblum and Will Smith had to do, who was a pilot in this particular story, they had to fly up to the mothership and upload a virus, so new programming, into the mothership. And then all the aliens on Earth were influenced by that programming. So all the emergent behavior of the aliens changed. Now, there's a few keys. One is that they couldn't be detected. So they had to fly in an alien ship so that it would fly under the proverbial radar. The next thing they had to do was open the door, get access to the system, and then they had to upload software that would be incorporated, integrated into the operating system. Now, this concept is not just Independence Day. It's Frodo throwing a ring into the fires of Mount Doom. It's the idea of the Matrix. It's a common theme. And it defines a three-step process, which gives us the key to transformation. So first, we need to avoid threat detection. Any individual that experiences something that's not consistent with who they are will probably experience it as a threat first. If it perceives this changed behavior as a threat, the self-structure sort of closes in, becomes more rigid, it protects itself. So you cannot trigger threat. Next, you've got to be open. You have to open and get access. People need to experience something that's deeply personal. That's that transformative experience. And that opens them and enables you to then implant the new programming. Now, we know what that sort of thing is because since the 70s at least, and probably earlier, Maslow was the first to publish about this. He wasn't the first to write about this, but certainly Maslow was the first to publish about this. Maslow's been saying that there's something very real in what he called the peak experience, what we tend to call the wilderness experience, meaning not just I'm walking in the wilderness, but I have a profoundly significant personal experience. We all know what they are. I'm standing on a mountain and I'm profoundly moved by something. Those things are real. Now, some 60 years later, we've been able to pick up those changes in the brain on functional MRI scanning, on SPECT scanning, and we know that those things are physiological, they're real. So we need to trigger those real experiences. It primes the brain, and then we upload the new identity. And the key here is that the behavior has to talk the language of the individual, like you need to talk Mac or PC. Humans need to see that this behavior is linked to what they already value and their already existing psychological needs. So if you're asking questions, you should at this point be asking, okay, now we're getting to the meat. So what are those core needs? Because if we can upload behavior that helps people meet their core needs, they'll incorporate that into their identity, they become different, and we can change trajectories of human behavior. So these three are the answer. These three are the original three that were identified as the three core universal human psychological needs. Universal means we all have them. We need to belong, be part of a tribe. We need to feel like we're good at something. We can actually be effectual and do something. We can accomplish things. And others see us as that too. And we need to feel like we have some influence, some ability to have choice, to choose our behavior. So we have some control. With these three, we get a long way, but recently there's been work on a fourth, which is about the reward of novelty. And novelty clearly is a need, we seek it out. So when we take these four, we can start to design activities and we can start to work on, well, okay, how would we go about taking people and putting them in wild places? How would we build competency? And here are a few ideas. And these are the ideas that we at the Wilderness Leadership School are starting to work with and explore and trying to understand how to maximize these out of wild experiences. So competency, for example, we can learn new skills that are relevant to that environment. And here's my daughter, Nicole, who's learning how to start a fire, but without matches. You can probably see what she's doing there. You've probably done it. Learning new skills obviously gives you a feeling of effectualness. I'm competent, but we can also understand a specific environment. All skills, all knowledge, all competency is all contextually based. So we want to sort of recapture some of the lost art of understanding a specific environment. We want to manage risk. And this is a very big topic. It's potentially a hot topic because we live in a world that's very safety averse or very safety centric and risk averse. The reality is we cannot ever reduce and eliminate all risk, eliminate or even reduce. So we have to manage a certain amount of risk, which requires competency. If we work in an environment with some risk, what we're saying to ourselves is, I'm good. It's what happens when we drive a car. We drive a car, it's inherently a risky activity. We can crash and die, but we feel like my skills, my ability, my competency are okay. They're up to scratch. I can manage that. And that's the key thing that we need to experience, is that ability to manage risk. It tells our brains we're competent. So how do we work on autonomy? Well, the obvious is embrace a little bit of hardship. This is us out in the Pilanesberg Game Reserve when it was about 1 degree. It probably went just sub-zero overnight. And when you do this, you think to yourself, why am I doing this? And the answer is because I want to. Autonomy. I chose it. Hardship is great for building feelings of I'm doing it, I'm choosing it. A big one that we work on is responsibility. This is one that was recognized in the 50s. And this image here is someone sitting around a fire in the evening. In the evenings, when trailists and the experiences that the Wilderness Leadership School conducts, they take a group of people on a walking trail, sleeping out in the open in the wild places. When evening time comes, the trailers take it in turn to stand watch around a fire and keep those elephants, those large animals away. It's a responsible position, because if you make a mistake or fall asleep, other people's safety is compromised. So the idea there is that when you take on a role of responsibility, you're feeling like you have autonomy. This particular slide is perhaps my favorite. This is Doric Holmes, one of the Wilderness Leadership School guides. And Doric taught me this principle. That's Nicole again, my daughter. And the key here is look at who is leading and look at where her eyes are looking. She's not looking at her feet. She's looking around, scanning. Doric's theory is, let's get people to walk in front. Let's go out of your comfort zone. And there's 7 other trailers behind these 2. And Nicole is walking, choosing the routes. And she's been briefed and primed and had a little bit of, some lessons on how to avoid dangerous areas. And Doric's right there holding her hand and has primed her. And if there's any animal encounter, he'll take over. But she is the eyes and ears of the group. And she is co-creating, deciding where we will go. That participation, it creates an incredible amount of autonomy. And relatedness, I don't need to say much more about that, other than if you don't have a tribe, then the changes we're talking about are not going to stick. Creating communities is one of the most powerful things we can do, and we don't do enough of that after activities are conducted. There's a big need to create communities where ordinary lay people can participate and can continue to participate. So those are the principles. Let's have a look how they sort of interplay, and then we're going to wrap up. If these 3 needs are in play, you should be able to see that you may get 1 or 2 of them, but not all. If you get these 2, effectual, and I feel like I'm in control, but I don't feel like I belong to a group, I'll feel like, yeah, I can do stuff, but it's kind of I'm a bit alone. I'm sort of disconnected from some bigger purpose, from some community. So I feel a bit purposeless. If I feel like, yep, I'm competent and I belong to a tribe, but they're disempowering me. I don't have any say. I'm passive. I feel unmotivated, disconnected. I'm not really engaged. And then if I have a sense of, yep, I'm being given some responsibility and I've got some autonomy and I belong to a group, but I'm not good. I'm useless in that tribe. I don't have any value or purpose. I'm not effectual. I feel ineffective. And that's not a good feeling. So you need to have all 3 of these to feel fully participatory and fully engaged. And when you add this idea of novelty and variable reward, what happens is, and in adventure communities, they call that stoked. I feel like stoked. You get driven, you get engaged, and it drives behavior into that autonomous zone. And there on that page is your formula. So if you want any proof that these principles work, this algorithm, if you like, works. Look at that. That's been around, that activity, for a long time, and that's serious skill. They directly, extreme and adventure sports directly build skills, overtly. Look at that, for managing risk. And look at that one, for experience creation. GoPro is a phenomenon, and it's about communities engaging in experience creation, co-creation. Look at Paddy, the best example I can think of for community creation. And they do it in an extremely inclusive way. This image is from the Women's Diving Day. They're deliberately creating communities and sub-communities around different special interest groups. And they're looking at diversity and inclusiveness and equity, something which I think we don't talk enough about in community building. And believe you me, if there's anything we need to do in Africa, it's engage the women. They hold the key. Then we've got variable reward. Fly fishing, bird watching, game viewing, safaris, you never quite know what you're going to bump into. And it's that triggers this incredible sense of, I got to do it again, gets you engaged and driven. What's the relevance? Well, extreme and adventure sports are some of the fastest growing activities in the world in the last 25 years. Half the US population participated at least once in outdoor activities. And what's significant about that is half didn't. Whilst participation in traditional activities is declining, these adventure sports and activities, these lifestyle activities, they've been called, because of that stoke and that drive and that engagement, they become lifestyles. Those activities are sharply increasing. 65% growth in 2011, 2012, 49% growth from 2016 to now, $300 billion adventure tourism market. We've got tens of millions of lifestyle adherents around the world. Like, that is because those activities use these principles, whether they know it or not. Those numbers mean that we have a very real potential to get 1 in 75 people around the world actively engaged in seriously committed, engaged outdoor activities in wild spaces. That number is realistic, and that number is significant because of Dunbar's number, if you know that. The point is the influence that anything sub 1 in 100 people can achieve literally ripples across communities and changes humanity. If we want to change the trajectory that we're on in the Anthropocene, we need to get people engaged in activities, in behaviors in the outdoors that meet this algorithm we've defined above, such that they become change agents at a scale that we have never seen before, a scale we are seeing currently right now. We need to participate in that conversation and be leaders in that activity. And that's the message here. We're actively engaged in this work. We'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear questions now. And I would love to be part of conversations with you in the future. There's my email address. You're welcome to talk to us, share your stories. This work, we believe, is extremely important. Humans are the real thing that matters in this era. And this work is about humans. With that, I'm going to stop. Thank you very much. And I'm going to see whether you have any questions in the last 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon. That was a fascinating presentation. I do have my own questions as well, but let's listen first to the audience's questions. We have one in the Q&A box. Thank you, Simon, for your inspiring presentation. What are the learnings of the current challenges, and how does the Wilderness Leadership School go forward from here?
Wow, okay, thank you very much for that question. It's a big question. Okay, let's focus on the biggest part of the big question. I think as I look at your question, you use the word learnings. What I would say is that something wonderful happened in the 1950s and 60s. The work of those founders is remarkable for its prescience, for its thinking ahead. I think the most important thing we can do to honor that legacy is to get current with modern science. We have knowledge today that they didn't have. They guessed at a lot of things that they turned out to be right about. I think what matters is get current with modern knowledge, reinvigorates the thinking of the mid-last century, take the experience of the last 70 years and package it into new models that will drive us forwards in the next century. So I think discussion, multidisciplinary input, currency with science, and taking what works and making it powerful, putting a more powerful engine in it. That's the work that goes forward. And I think that'll lay the path open for the Wilderness Leadership School. We want to drive this work forward and really scale up the impact. And that's what we're going to be trying to do.
Okay, thank you. I hope that answered your question. We have multiple comments in the chat box that this was an outstanding presentation. From Francis, we have a comment. Thanks, Simon. This has been a fantastically lucid call to arms. Your themes so closely parallel the practices of forest schools in the UK, which are now reaching 10,000s of children. We don't use wildernesses, but they are wildernesses in the eyes of the children. The key is that everyone returns to the same special place every week for the same positive, challenging, slow-moving experiences in real community.
Yeah, thank you. I'm looking at this comment myself now. You're right. I think what's significant here is that what we know from neuroscience today is that we don't need perfection to make big improvements. And I think we need to recognize that. I'm a purist, believe you me. I want to go somewhere where I cannot see as far as the horizon and all 360 degrees all around me. I want to see no sign of humanity. I do not want an airplane. I do not want a sound. I want that experience. And luckily in Africa, we can get that experience. The good news is we don't have to have that. What we need to do is transport people to somewhere that is just different enough to create the environment that gives them those personal, meaningful, significant moments, and we can start uploading new behaviors. So we need a habitat that allows them to learn new things and engage in activities they wouldn't. The benefit is anywhere where there's a forest, anywhere where there's a bit of wildland, anywhere where there's something remotely different to an urban environment, we can take children and adults. So I strongly advocate the idea of looking for any spot in and around and near a city. The more people that we can get into contact there, things you never know who it's going to touch. You never know where you're going to be able to make the best inroads. So we need to use every opportunity, every spot we've got. Yes. I'm just looking over here and I see there's another question coming in. We've got a minute. Let me see if I can answer this. How can we reach and turn around people who are furthest away from nature in China? Yeah, the answer to that in a short minute answer is that all human beings are the same. That's what neuroscience has taught us. And it's beautiful because it means we can move away from borders and xenophobia and discrimination and inequity. We can start seeing sameness more than difference. So what it means is that we go through the same steps of first, recognizing that we've got to avoid the threat. So we work with where people are, people that are very urban orientated, the half of the population that don't get outdoors. Sure, maybe we have to go very, very simple at first. We have to downgrade our expectations a little and work where they are at. But we do that. We don't trigger threat. We open them up. We give them some new behaviors. We link it to their core psychology, their core needs, and we see the results. Everybody, wherever they are, is going to respond the same way. So we use what we have where we are with where people are at the time, understanding the theory and applying it to them, and it works everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon. And we will touch on this subject again in the afternoon when Joe Roberts from the Wilderness Foundation in UK will talk about wilderness well-being. So this topic will return in the afternoon as well. Thank you again, Simon. If there will be still comments or questions in the chat, then I encourage you to try to answer them if you have time and stay with us. So thank you again for your presentation.